This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Well, today you are in for a treat. So happy that you chose to spend the next 22 minutes with me, Erin Trafford, listening to the fourth draft because I've got some fun things for us to think about today. I'm actually really stoked for today's episode. And this is a whole building in season 2 of the fourth draft. So if you're just hopping in on episode 4, maybe you found me on LinkedIn, maybe you're on our newsletter list over at Story Studio Network where we talk about the show and we're sending regular communications there. But if you haven't really gone back to episode 1 of season 2, maybe do that. Listen to this one and then go back. Because there's a theme this season that is absolutely presenting itself in terms of media and communication strategy and owned media and the evolution of media. And I have to tell you that there was a point last year when, and I'm saying last year, 2024, 2023 even, when I was like, what is gonna happen? What is gonna happen with media? There were rampant cuts all over the place. Obviously, in corporate media, journalists losing their jobs, broadcasters losing their jobs. There were independents shutting down. We had Bill C-18 and C-11 in Canada, the Online News Act, and all this stuff has just felt like there was so much noise. And I admitted this in episode 1, and I'll admit it again here. That was part of the reason why I needed to step back from this show, because I launched it at the beginning of 2024, actually at the end of 2023 and into 2024. And I was really bullish on it. But here's the mistake I made. And I'll be completely honest and vulnerable with you. The mistake I made in launching this show at that time, both in my life, in the industry, and with respect to where our business was at that point, is there was this twinge of anger in me that I was not able to fully yet rationalize. And it was a culmination of, 40 years of being in this business and then feeling like all of a sudden everyone who loved media, everyone who's devoted their lives to media, people who really believe in the necessity of media, both for brands and organizations and just as a function of democracy, that we were just constantly being shit on everywhere you turned. And I mentioned the anger because if you haven't listened to the Not-for-Profit episode, I talk about the spectrum of emotions and how as humans, we all experience the entire spectrum. Some experience certain areas of the spectrum more intensely than others, but we're all capable of feeling the entire spectrum. And so when I talk about communications and storytelling, when I talk about resonance, when I talk about needing to reflect your audience, when I say phrases like you need to meet your audience where they are, I mean, yes, you need to teach them what they need to know, and you're there to fill a gap and you're there to inform. But there's this other layer there that is really important to touch on, and it is that emotional resonance layer. And the only way that you can do that truly and authentically and effectively is by understanding the emotion that you are using to create the messaging. Okay. And I know I'm getting a little woo-woo here, but it's really important because I've fallen into this pit a bunch of times because I am human. I am not perfect. I love this business. I love doing what I do, but every once in a while I fall down and I got to get back up again and figure out, okay, wait a minute, that didn't work right. That didn't feel right. And so why I say this with the fourth draft is that when I started this show, and you'll probably hear it, if you want to go back and listen to the first 12 episodes, I bet you'll be able to detect this now that I've pointed this out, is that I started the show because I was angry. And here's the thing about anger. It is not a sustainable state. It will lead to burnout faster than any other emotion on the spectrum. Resentment is similar, guilt is similar, like all of those kind of negative Nelly emotions. Anger can be a spark, but it cannot sustain you. And so as this change and these rapid shifts and people losing their jobs and this huge pressure and this economic contraction and all of this stuff was happening, I realized, I started this show with a seed of anger, and now I don't know what I've got to keep it going. So I needed to take the whole year. I needed to process the anger, and I needed to come to a place of optimism before I got back on the microphone. And that is where I am now. I have to say, I have put down the mantle of the media is unfixable and everything sucks and fire and brimstone. I've put it down. I'm not going to complain as much anymore. I promise. What I am going to do is point out where in that rubble there are light spots. And there are many now that I see. There are many now that I see. So today I want to talk about those light spots, and I want to bring this new vision of media to you from a place of complete levity, honesty, and vulnerability, because hello, that's what you know me for. Okay. I laugh because if you've listened to talk radio or whatever, all the old white curmudgeons say, if you're not listening, if you're not outraged, you're not listening. And yes, outrage is okay to spark the initial creation, the initial story, the initial reaction, but it cannot sustain you, and it was not going to sustain this show. So today we are stepping out on a new optimistic foot, and we're going to talk about the media trends, the optimistic media trends that you cannot ignore in 2025, and where there is so much space for beautiful shifts in creation and beautiful shifts in your strategy, no matter what sphere you are in. Okay. So I'm going to outline 3 of the trends that I see and 3 of the trends that are making me the most lit up. All right. So the 3 big trends are the following, and I'm going to give you a few examples of each or like context around them all, but just for sake of you knowing where we're going with all of this. Okay. The 3 big trends are the unignorable rise of AI with respect to personalization. So there are going to be some caveats when we talk about AI. Trust me, I don't trust it completely. And you know that the theme of this entire season of the 4th draft is all about trust. So we're going to talk about AI, why I'm excited about it, and just a few things to be aware of. I also really want to start getting into this conversation with you about this, what I think is a gorgeous shift in the way especially corporate communications is going and, sector level communications. I'm talking about if you are in spheres that deal with big issues like climate change, like energy, like housing, like all of those things. I want to talk about this incredible shift in our approach to communications and media from simply driving awareness to instead inviting advocacy. And I really want to talk about that because I'm hugely bullish on it. I'm very optimistic about it. I think it could be a way to really crack the nut for a lot of folks who are stuck right now. And then I think the other trend that we're seeing is not the death of earned media. Not at all. I think we're seeing it change. I think there's a changing role that is emerging here for earned media. And this is a good thing. This is all good stuff. None of this is fire and brimstone. And in fact, I've said this over and over again through this season, leaning into these 3 trends is part of what is going to let you simplify your strategies going forward. It is part of what is going to let you put down all that baggage and crap that just does not work. And it bogs you down. And it means that you get to the end of the year and you're like, well, we didn't do half the stuff we wanted to do. You're going to be able to put that all down. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's talk about the 3 trends, okay? First one is AI. And I want to talk about AI in particular with respect to its ability to help you personalize, okay? AI is not just for tech companies. It really, really isn't. We have leaned in heavily into AI at Story Studio Network. Heavily. We are using it to help shorten the distance between us and the story. We're not using it to tell the story. We're not using it to tell us what the story is, heaven forbid. No, we're still using our heartstrings, our brains, our experience, our intuition, all of those things that AI does not have. But we are absolutely using it to help us cut the busy work out. Okay, so what does this mean for you if you're a small organization, not for profit, maybe you're an entrepreneur? I want you to think about this through the lens of what your audience now expects. We are in the age of what's in it for me. Make sure that you are showing up for me. And I'm speaking as your audience member now, right? And if I can't remember what episode I told you that example of, I got on a sales call with someone and the messaging wasn't right? Like she was too rigid in her messaging and not adaptable enough. And part of that was my expectation that her message be very, very relevant to just me. Like I was really representing this audience member who was expecting this hyper personalization, and it didn't feel that way and it fell flat. I think that's a new expectation of audiences, right? So think of it this way. When you are showing up in your comms, whether it's on social media, through your press releases, through your earned media, through your podcast interviews, through your own branded podcast, on your blogs, on your YouTube, whatever it is that you're using, your audience is expecting to be seen and heard and not just marketed to. I always say the audience is the smartest person in the room. They can tell. Whether they can articulate that they can tell is a different thing, but they can tell when you are using your content and your storytelling simply as a function of marketing. They don't want that anymore. So I'm going to invite you to look at what AI tools you can start to leverage in order to create more dynamic content that both anticipates and reacts. You can do things like much better email segmentation. You can do things like using, now I don't like this yet, but maybe it's just something to lean into. It really depends on what business you're in, but some of those chat bots, some of those personalized help bots that pop up on certain websites or after you've read a certain article, I don't think you should rely on those. But what those can help you do is understand your audience's expectations better and faster so that the humans on the other side can show up more fully in your response to those people, right? So those are some of the places that I would start to look at where you can use AI. We also use AI really effectively on our team to create processes. So if you're in a creative business, sometimes finding the process for how you create something is really hard. So we spent about a quarter, and I mean like 3 months, 4 months, training our AI to unpack our process and help us see gaps and help us see opportunities there. And now we've actually, as a result, been able to shrink down some of our timeline assumptions, which helps our clients get things done faster, right? And we wouldn't have really been able to come to those same conclusions as quickly if we weren't using AI. So all this to say is, if you are going to investigate AI, and I think you should, start small. Just pick one part of your comms and media strategy right now that feels super crunchy. The part that you're like dreading, the part that never feels like it works. Maybe it's the part of that plan that always falls off the side of the desk, right? Look at it through that lens and ask yourself, okay, how can I use AI to maybe refine this process, speed up the timeline, or help me understand my audience's expectations better? And like I said, that might end up being assistance with creating more dynamic and responsive content. It might be email segmentation or social media segmentation. It might be using a chatbot to ask better questions and those kinds of things, right? You're going to come up with your own solution, but that's the question to ask. The last thing I'll say is the word of warning, is that AI absolutely can help you scale, just as I've explained to you, like we've done at Story Studio Network. It's helped us refine our timelines. But it cannot build trust. That is still on you. Garbage in, garbage out. So if you are not teaching your AI systems to act and respond and make decisions and recommendations through the lens of your company's vision, values, mission, and desire to create a culture of trust, you will stub your toe a lot using AI. So make sure you're coming at it with that proper intention. It will never, ever, 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 ever be able to create the trust. But if you tell it that that's something you want to do over the long term, you will stub your toe less. Okay, so that's trend number 1, AI personalization. Trend number 2 is a bit headier. It's a bit meatier. I am working on a workshop to this effect. I'm actually hoping to turn it into, like a 45-minute talk. So if you're interested in this, get in touch and we can have a jam about this. But it's this shift that I'm seeing as in and we've talked about this, right? There was from about 2019 onward, it was like about being the loudest person in the room. The loudest person in the room is usually the person who is not actually listening to anything, right? And that was all about just being aware, right? If you're the loudest, it's very hard to not be aware of you. If you're constantly touching your clients in ways that don't really mean anything, yeah, okay, I'm aware of you. But how am I acting as a result of that awareness? So the thesis I now have, and it is a thesis, guys, because communications, media, all these things, they're constantly evolving. It's part and parcel of culture. There is no hard and fast rule. There's no, this is the way that it is. So everything that I propose to you through this show is simply a working thesis that I'm interested in testing and proving right or proving wrong. But the current thesis that I'm working with and that I'm seeing evidence for is that awareness campaigns are really no longer enough. The real power is in turning your audience into an advocate. And I get really excited when I come face to face with a potential client for Story Studio Network, especially one that's at the enterprise level that really wants to go all in on an investigative or a narrative branded podcast that uses our journalistic chops, that goes out and does crazy interviews about big topics and weaves this all together with the intention of educating on an issue, of keeping the audience entertained, of driving the brand values through the narrative, but that the end goal is not just the education and the entertainment. The end goal for a lot of these organizations that we work with is to then allow those audience members, those listeners, to be so moved that they advocate on behalf of the mission. This works incredibly well for not-for-profits. This works incredibly well for folks in the natural resource sector. This works incredibly well for anybody who wants to use new media communications and especially owned media communications to start shifting hearts and minds such that as a country and as a culture, we can evolve. So usually that means getting the ears and the eyes of people in Ottawa and policymakers. That's what that means. The function of this shift from awareness to advocacy looks like this. It means you need to really look critically at where you are simply broadcasting your message. You need to stop thinking now of your audience as these passive recipients of what you're saying, and you need to start inviting them to be active participants. So you'll remember in, I believe it's episode 3, when I talked about not-for-profits, is you got to start getting really clear in asking your audience to do something. You've got to educate them enough so that they see the issue. You got to keep them entertained so they stay with you and they don't get bored. Oh my gosh. That's where a lot of these big brain issues fall flat, as they start a podcast and it's boring AF. You might have the smartest thing to say in the world, and if your show is boring, you're wasting your time. Come talk to us. We'll make you unboring. I promise. We will take the boringest of things and make it entertaining. Okay. So you're going to educate them on the issue. You're going to keep them hooked because they're entertained. You're leaving them wanting more. But that third piece of the pie is then you're asking them to do something. You're asking them to become part of your mission. You're not asking them just to be aware. You're asking them to actually have an emotional stake in the outcome that is attached to now a shared vision. You cannot unring that bell once it's done. Once you have an advocate for your issue, they are going to be advocates for you for a very long time, unless you step in it. Don't step in it. Keep it going. And advocacy, folks, is not about being the loudest in the room. It's really not. It's about fostering those real connections that will make somebody proud to stand up beside you. And with podcasting and with new media, this is why I'm so bullish on it. You can create advocates in places you could never physically be. It's incredibly powerful. I want you to consider it. So here's the action. Start by looking at who your most loyal supporters are, and then see where in your strategy are you arming them with the tools to amplify your message. Maybe it's shareable podcast episodes. Maybe it's exclusive content. Maybe it's some kind of message that allows them to do your good work for you. Awareness is passive. Advocacy is powerful. So it's time to think about how to make that shift. Okay, let's move on to the third, which is this changing role of earned media. So there was a point since the pandemic, really, where I was like, what is earned media anymore? We're running out of inventory. Shows are shutting down, journalists are getting cut, reporters are inundated with like hundreds and hundreds of pitches a week, and they don't have time to check their email, and they're run ragged, and they're not paid enough. And what is going to happen to earned media? Are we losing our ability to pitch a really good story and have a reporter pick it up and then also treat the story with the depth that it deserves? I wasn't confident for a really long time that we were ever going to get back to a place where earned media meant anything. And I'm still, like, if I'm being totally honest, I'm still a little wary because we are in that trust gap right now. So, take all of this into consideration, that if you are relying wholly on earned media, that no matter what, we're now in a situation where there is a significant percentage of people who are looking at what mainstream media is producing and not trusting it no matter what. So even if you do get your story picked up, even if you do get your message picked up, even if you do end up on those mainstream channels, you might be inadvertently widening your trust gap. And I want you to be aware of that. I need you to think about your strategy and whether you have planned for that. I'm not saying don't do earned media. I'm saying be aware that it means something different now. Okay? So all this to say, earned media still matters, but the role has fundamentally changed. It's no longer the end game. It is just part of the journey, okay, to crafting your message, to owning your narrative, to coming out strong. And I mentioned, mainly, the main thing I'm seeing is this evolving trust dynamic. So if you're pitching mainstream and it's working for you and you're getting pickup, keep doing it. But the other place to look is these niche independent media outlets, whether that's podcasts, whether that's smaller news outlets, local news outlets, wherever they exist. Think a little differently about who you're going after to tell your story, because I'll be the first to tell you, and this is also a hill I will die on, it's no longer about this broad reach. It's about the niche reach. If you want to create an advocate, you don't need to talk to everybody. So where can you adjust your earned media strategy to hit more of those niche independent sources? You'll have better luck there in terms of shortening the trust gap. Okay. The other piece to this is if you are out there creating your own owned media, your blog posts, your newsletters, your Substacks, your branded podcasts, those kinds of things, is I want you to start thinking about those as actually fueling your earned media strategy. So think of it as if you get earned media, what comes next? What comes next? You want to drive those people who may trust you or may not trust you because they've found you on earned media back to an owned media source where you are now in control of shortening the trust gap. What does this look like in real life? I'll give you an example. You launch an incredibly provocative podcast. You get earned media coverage on your local morning show. You promote the podcast. You talk about the mission of the podcast on the morning show. You talk about the guests you've had on the podcast on the morning show. You talk about the statistics and the research that you have presented on the podcast on the morning show, so that the people who are listening to that morning show, they may just say, I don't trust that. That's baloney. And they're not your people anyway. But the people who are intrigued are going to go check out your podcast. And then guess what you have? A measurable trust metric. That's how this is supposed to work. That's how this is going to work going forward. I want you to think about that. Your podcast is not a tack-on solution. Your podcast can drive that trust metric. Your podcast can shorten that trust gap. So every earned media hit, this is your actionable thing to consider. Every earned media hit should have a clear next step. Where do you want that audience to go next? And I would challenge you to make sure that they're going back to an owned resource. Earned media is no longer the destination. It is now the gateway to your owned narrative. Think of how powerful that is. Think of that. All right. So, can you tell I'm back to a point of optimism here? I am back. So here's what we covered today. AI-driven personalization. Don't ignore it. Lean in. Check it out. Let's talk about this shift from awareness to advocacy. Whew. Power play. And then reconsider where earned media is sitting in terms of your priority list and your goals list. Where is it on that journey? Because it's no longer the last stop. This is your roadmap to success for 2025, people. This is your roadmap to success. All right. So next episode, I want to really drill down on this advocacy as a strategy kind of idea and how to turn your audience into an asset. I'm so excited that you are back here with me. Thanks for listening. By the way, you can get in touch with me. All the stuff is in the show notes. Find me on LinkedIn. Book a call. We can talk about working together. Whatever you want, it's all there for you. All right, until next time. Thanks for listening.
SSN.
We know podcasts.
Find us at storystudionetwork.com.